This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're looking at how to make bolder brushstrokes. They're a cool way to give your paintings a stronger visual impact, and there's something that I just personally love doing. This video will also include some practical exercises that you can do on your own time to get to that end result. Like usual, I'll be painting in this video, so feel free to grab your own brush and let's do some art while I cover this topic. I haven't really explained what the random pieces of text are in the beginning of my videos. Sorry, I don't know if it's confusing, but I believe that every painting deserves a name, so they are painting names. This painting also has one. Not blending everything and just letting the texture of your brushstrokes be part of the final artwork. It has that look that I personally find very exciting and very inspiring to look at and also to paint. When I see a painting that has visible big brushstrokes, the experience of seeing the painting takes me to the action of painting the artwork itself. It's like seeing the structure and essence of the subject through the painter's own personal handwriting. One of my old art teachers has this very colorful, unapologetic way of painting, and every time I go to one of her exhibitions, the excitement she feels toward the painting can be seen in the way the brushstrokes are arranged on the canvas. The paintings look a bit like when a kid discovers liquid paints for the first time and just goes like crazy on the canvas. I just find that sense of enthusiasm incredibly infectious, and seeing her paintings always makes me want to go home and paint right away. So why is this way of painting still so scary for most of us? I mean, it's pretty standard to see chunky brushstrokes in traditional art. I've been painting for a long time, and from my own perspective, the culture of digital art galleries still heavily emphasizes smooth shading and perfectly blended colors. I don't know why it's like this, but I have a few guesses. Maybe it comes from the fact that most professional digital art is still paid for by clients, and it's still pretty rare for any client to come to me and say, "Hey Mikko, just do you, paint it the way that you want to paint it." It's way more likely that they have a specific set of things that they want to see, and they want me to render everything in a clear way. It's just easier to default to a certain way of painting that is easy to read and understand and probably won't offend anyone. This creates certain kind of herd mentality. Even if we consciously know it's not true, there's just something about having this smooth looking digital art everywhere that makes it feel like it's the right way to paint on a certain level, especially if you want to do it professionally. If you have a group of friends around you that are also learning to paint at the same time as you are, it can be really scary to step out of this group and explore different ways of expressing yourself. Leaving the brushstrokes in might feel like you're being lazy or disrespectful to your audience. This is not the case. When you are doing this exercise, you will see that this is not an easy way to paint. It's, in my own personal opinion, harder way to paint, but whether you appreciate that or not, that is completely up to you. When you're discovering your own way of utilizing brushstrokes, there's really no map for it, the same way that nobody teaches you how to write your own signature. It's just once you have enough mileage, it will happen in the way that comes naturally to you. Now, this might be a bit controversial, but I really don't want to make it sound like using big brushstrokes is in any way an easy way to paint. I think a huge problem with free YouTube art tutorials is that to sell the concept of the video, people like me usually have to speak about the results like they're very easy and fast to obtain. Very few things in art is so easy that you'll just instantly pick it up. Some things just demand practice and time. But I think the end goal is definitely worth it. Understanding this, it's time to move on to the exercises. I'm going to list a few exercises that help you progress towards using bigger, bolder brushstrokes in your own paintings. Now remember that you don't need to stack all of these suggestions in your workflow at once. This is important. In fact, it's better to start with maybe just one and gradually increase the difficulty by seeing if you can eventually use all of the restrictions mentioned in this video. Also, with any exercise, be patient with the difficulty. The danger here is that you try too much too soon, and the frustration will be so strong that you feel demotivated to continue at all. Art is not a sprint, it's a never-ending series of marathons. I strongly believe that your most important job as an artist is to maintain a good relationship with your creativity. Not just when doing practice stuff, but like always throughout your entire life. This mission of keeping art fun for you is never really complete. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder, but keeping art enjoyable for you should always be the first thing that you check with yourself whenever you change what you're doing with your creativity or in your art in general. Now, that might sound silly, but I'm dead serious about this, guys. Nothing that I say or suggest on this channel should ever come between you and finishing and publishing more art. But it's your own responsibility to keep those boundaries and learn what they are for you and what works for you. Now, the first part of this exercise, and something that you need for any of the rest of what I'm about to say to make sense, is to pick a brush that has a bit of character in it. You can use whatever brush appeals to you, but keep in mind that you're not going to be changing this brush for the duration of the entire painting at all. I recommend that you pick a brush that has at least most of these following features. The brush should have texture that is visible with each brush stroke. Please note that the amount of texture that is in that brush stroke also determines the difficulty of this exercise. If you're using Procreate, you already have Nick Corral in the default process. That might be a good place to start since it has quite a subtle grain to it. Grain is what determines the texture in your brush. Plus, it's also free, so there's no reason not to do it. Remember that you don't need to buy anything. You don't need to buy my brushes to do this exercise. You probably already have a brush that it works just as well. But if you have already bought my brush set called Brushes for Painters, from that set I would recommend Nick Corral as a starting brush for this exercise, because it has a bit more control with pressure and it can be an easy place to start. In this painting, I'm using the brush of the month that I made for the lovely members of this channel, the Angry Mob. This brush is called Pastel on Wood, and I made it out of materials that I encountered on my trip to Lapland. So both the source and grain is wood. The source itself is actually a branch mark cut out of a bigger piece of wood. It's only temporarily available, so if you're watching this a month from now, it might already be gone. Besides, this brush is not an easy one to start this practice with, so I personally probably wouldn't recommend this for beginners. Lines will be cut off unexpectedly with this brush, and sometimes it requires more pressure when running into a cut in the wood. Personally, I just love this brush because of those reasons, but honestly guys, don't begin with this one because it has so much character. You probably really have to let go of perfectionism and just to see what happens when you're using this one. So to recap, that Nick Corral in Procreate is already free and perfectly good for painting. The second feature that your brush should have is some size control, set to the way that you use that brush. That can be size set to pressure or tilt, and what this does is that it gets you out of the habit of spending too much time in the menus of whatever program that you're using. Make sure that the minimum of the brush doesn't go all the way to 0. Even at the lowest end of that brushstroke size, it shouldn't look like a scratch on your canvas or a small hairline. Because this exercise isn't about drawing, this is about painting. Those are two very different things. Finally, your brushstroke should leave behind areas that are easy to color pick without adjusting the opacity of the brush. Usually, even the hard-edged brushes have some blended color at the edges if you zoom in close enough. To make life easier for yourself, I recommend always having some way to get low opacity coverage with your brushstroke that is easy to color pick. This can be achieved by having gray tones in either the source of the brush or grain of the brush. Either one results in translucent pixels, and those are the ones that you want to color pick when you want to make those transition colors. I use this method in most of my own brushes to avoid visiting the opacity slider all the time. It's not the only way to do it, but it saves me a ton of time. Also, there's no reason why you couldn't just watch that video and add that setting to whatever brush that you are using, and that's a free way of tweaking your brush. Videos like these are expensive to make, so I want to give thanks to Skillshare for making this video possible. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Explore new classes, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. Most classes are under 60 minutes, with short lessons to fit any schedule. I always say that becoming an artist is really only a small part about painting. What you also need to learn is very high-level marketing skills, otherwise nobody will find you. On Skillshare, I recently watched this class by Chris Ballman. It's called Brand Management, Creating What Sets You Apart. Branding is not just font or logo that you use, and I think this class is a good checklist to see what areas of your social media presence can be tweaked to be more unified. Clearly, I'm not great at this myself, because I always feel like I want to create new graphics for everything, and it's something that I need to still work on. Resources such as this class is a good way for creators like me to make progress towards being basically all departments in your own company. Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. And it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership, so you can explore your creativity. Now that we have our brush selected, let's talk about how you can set boundaries that help you become more brave with those brush strokes. The first level you probably already guessed if you're familiar with my videos. Don't change the brush. If you follow the advice on what characteristics your brush should have, there will be moments when the brush creates texture in areas where you didn't expect that to happen. Your first instinct might be to go to the brush menu and switch to an easier brush that you can use to paint that area with the level of detail that you thought that it needs. Try to resist that urge and just keep painting. Instead of zooming into the mistake, try zooming out and see if you can keep the happy little accident there, or maybe use a bigger size of a brush that doesn't create similar expectations for the viewer in that area. The viewer will expect that those tiny brush strokes all contain information that they need to consume. So don't change the brush. Remember that just using this one restriction alone has several different difficulty modes. It all depends on how much character your chosen tool has. I would consider the character of Pastel on wood, this brush, to be around 90, where something like default round brush that has 0 character, I would consider the difficulty of using that brush to be 0. As you paint, you can also start paying attention to the minimum brush size. Do you need the full range of brush scale? I would be careful with using brushes that have extremely small minimum scale. If your brush just causes like these thin scratches, like thin hairlines on your painting, they don't really add anything but noise to visual impact of most paintings. The minimum size of the brush that I am using is quite small, but I never go to the lowest size with this brush. The smallest brush strokes in this painting happen on that right ear of this fox, and there is no other part of this painting that has that small brush strokes. Personally, I think that using that small brush strokes in the context of this painting was a bit of a mistake, so I didn't want to use that small brush strokes again. I've noticed that it's quite common for artists to go for extremely tiny brushes when they're depicting tiny things, like eyelashes or hair. There's a time and place for painting eyelashes, but as a general guideline, I'd recommend thinking about the distance from the subject in your painting. If an eye covers your entire canvas, like a macro close-up, then maybe it's time for some very small details. Think about the painting and your framing as like using a camera. You are setting the viewer into some situation in that painting, whether you see the character or not. But who is looking at this painting? If the person that is in your painting is 30 meters away, you probably wouldn't focus on their eyelashes even in real life. So adding them in a painting can be distracting if that's not the entire point of your painting. And if somebody is 30 meters away, could you really even tell the color of their eyes from that distance? Probably not. Setting a minimum scale to how small brushstrokes you use is one more way to encourage you to make bigger, bolder decisions with the way you work. If used correctly, it can also give your paintings more presence and turn it from just an image to an experience for the viewer, as your viewers will fill in those details on their own without you holding their hand too tightly. And this will make the experience of seeing the painting more personal for them because they are making part of the image. So I recommend just getting out of the way from letting that experience happen. Like, don't suffocate that experience. Then let's talk about opacity. This is getting a bit harder. I tend to keep the opacity of my brush at maximum at all times. This isn't something that I recommend for everyone to incorporate into their painting style, but if you want to learn how to utilize your brushstrokes in your paintings with more courage, then I highly recommend sticking to 100% opacity for this type of exercise. One of my good friends once told me, a brushstroke needs to either be there or doesn't. If I use a 50% brush, I'm avoiding the decision and I'm not doing what's right for the painting. And somehow this just really stuck with me, mostly because I respect her paintings and her painting skills, and this just is inherently apparent in the way that she paints. Please note that this doesn't mean that you can't do transition colors. You can and should do them. You can simply choose a transition color and paint it at 100% opacity. If you have those grayscale pixels in the grain of your brush or the source of your brush, these colors should always be available for you in the painting already with each brushstroke that you make. As you can probably tell by now, if you're one of those people who labels themselves as a perfectionist, these restrictions are going to be extra tough for you. So take it easy, take it slow, things are going to happen in your painting that you weren't prepared for, and that's okay. Now when that happens, there's one more restriction. Don't touch the eraser. Leaving the eraser out might not be super intuitive at first, but honestly, it's one of the easiest things to do on this whole list. When you make a brushstroke that feels like it's a mistake, just paint over it. Because of that texture in your brush, this way of working actually makes the colors more rich, and the end result is in most cases better than cleaning everything up and starting from scratch. Every time your brush texture leaves those low opacity pixels or cracks of paint, you can see the layers beneath, and it makes the whole surface of the painting more interesting to watch. This painting is done in quite large resolution, as you can see here, and I can show proof of this method in detail shots at the end. You probably won't see them in tiny Instagram posts, but in my experience, I personally love seeing these sort of details in large-scale prints. And that's why I make them even for paintings that I do just for myself, because I might want to have a large-scale print made out of my own work. Resolution is something that might seem like it has very little to do with this type of practice, but if you're working on Procreate like me, high resolution comes with the burden of a limited number of layers. Normally, this is just a bad limitation because of the current processing power of the system of iPads. However, when you want to put yourself into a situation where you're making bolder decisions with your brushstrokes, I actually recommend limiting the number of layers you use. You can do them in super high resolution, and that will limit the number of layers that you can use, but that can be a great thing, because not only do you get that super high resolution at the end of that painting session, but you also have this limitation that forces you to paint everything on almost the same layer. The lower you make this number of layers, then the harder this exercise will be. For this painting, I am painting 99% of the time only on one single layer. But when I want to find a new color easier through a blend mode, or if I want to try changing a major part of the composition, I use a temporary layer as a second layer. I try that thing or I find that color and then I immediately merge that layer down, so that in the end I will return to that one single layer again. So that temporary second layer is always merged once I get what I want. You might be surprised how this limitation changes the physicality of your brushstrokes. One of my own personal favorite things about this are those small edge areas where I have to physically stop the brushstroke to avoid going over another visual element. In this painting, you can clearly see it like an outline of that fox where I have stopped painting the sky to avoid the blue color from going over the fox. And that creates almost like this fringe area on the outer edges of this fox. Now, everybody doesn't probably like this, but I just love that effect of paint when it has that sort of like very tactile physical feeling. Now, when you are incorporating any of these delimitations to guide your process so that you will learn bolder, more courageous brushstrokes, you will initially see a decrease in your speed of painting. However, if you stick with it, you will eventually paint faster than when you started. When this happens, you can try adjusting the difficulty by adding another one of these modifiers to your workflow when you are practicing brushstrokes. What this does is that you will get faster, but that fastness comes from your control of the brush itself. So you don't need all those other crutches to help with the painting, and you will just manage with this one tool to accomplish what all those other tools combined used to do. So that is where the quickness comes from, and that's also what makes your paintings look way more confident in the end. How you actually place your brushstrokes, that's a whole another challenge, and that's a whole set of different videos. I already made this talk about how to use them in composition, but there could honestly be a bunch of videos on different approaches. I think the next one I'm going to make in that beginner to advanced series will be about brushstrokes and surface volume, but ironically before that I'll do one video on blending. That video on color blending should be up for Angry Mob in few days, along with the long form video of this painting. Now please understand that I'm not saying that this way of painting is better or worse here. There are definitely benefits to knowing how to blend colors as well, but as an artist, it's so helpful to have an option to choose how you want to say what you're saying. The delivery of the message is like 100% of the value of the painting. Everything has already been done in some form by someone. Just because someone else has painted, for example, foxes before, doesn't take away the value of me using them as a symbol of loneliness in my own paintings. I don't try to hide the way that I paint in my paintings, and to me that's enough reason to make my own art, because nobody would say these things in my own voice, and that's why I always try to encourage young artists to let their own handwriting be part of their work. Think about it. Even if I practiced for 50 years, I still would never be able to paint the way that you do. That alone should be enough reason to just start painting already. Not just anything, mind you, but paint the way that only you can paint. Thank you for watching this video. I'm Mikko and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!